Hi there, data scamps and data champs. This is Richie. Very excited for another session. While we get going, please do let us know where you're joining from in the chat. And one thing to note before we get started, you do need a Google account and you need to be logged in. So if you've not done that, then please get yourself signed up. I'm sure most people have a Google account at this point, right? For the one of you who's in here that doesn't have a Google account, then please do sign up. For everyone else, please do make sure you're logged into your Google account. All right, so let's just kick off. Now, any business that has a website or an app, which is to say, basically every business, for them, it's really useful to know which pages people visit in what order. So maybe they come and buy something, maybe they browse and leave, maybe they come back the next day, or maybe they're just gone forever. So this sequence of interactions with all your websites and with all your applications, this is called the customer journey, and it's incredibly valuable to analyze, as I'm sure you can imagine. That means that being able to understand and analyze customer journeys is a skill that's needed in every business. It's a very, very popular task for data analysts. What you can learn today is incredibly useful for pretty much any analytics career. And so today we're going to learn how to analyze customer journeys using Google Analytics 4. It's one of the most popular tracking tools for people's journeys around websites. And our guest is Josh Lauer. He's the CEO at the marketing intelligence consultancy, Lauer Creations. Hi, Josh.
Hello.
So, Josh basically helps businesses understand their customers using the Google Analytics stack. So, he's doing what we're doing this code along all day for a living. And previously, he comes from a marketing intelligence background. He was head of digital marketing at Skill Success. And before that, he worked as an engineer. So he was a growth engineer at Telesign. With that, over to you, Josh. Please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you. So yeah, we've got a lot of good stuff today. I'll try to be as brief as possible with the slides, but just to give you a little bit of a background, we're going to use some GA4 demo data from shop.merch.google. Our primary goal is to understand various traffic sources for users, sessions, and the e-commerce conversion rates. This site is an e-commerce site, so e-commerce data is important here. Also, another goal is understanding various landing pages that are leading to people coming to the site. How are those performing? Do we have different devices that are, whether it's mobile, desktop, tablet? How are we doing with those? And so, I think the why here is that again, if you've got a website or an app, you're going to want to report on what's happening with it. People at the company are going to want to know how many new signups we have, and so on and so forth. So there's a variety of things that marketers need to report on, and Google Analytics is one of the main tools that does that for us. So why Google Analytics? I've got a link here to Built With, and basically, according to the data on that website, there are over 28 million live sites today that use Google Analytics. And historically, counting the live sites, there's over 77 million sites that have used it. So there are a lot of alternatives to Google Analytics, but I think it'd be hard for anyone to come up with a solution that's been used on more websites over time. Also, if you're just going to start it off, it's free. Up to 1 million events per day can be tracked and sent to BigQuery, where you can then do more data analysis with those. And the only cost to you is the BigQuery compute and storage costs at that point. We're going to use Looker Studio to visualize the data. And so there's a variety of tools out there that you can sort of do data visualization with. Looker Studio has many native integrations. It's a Google product. So, you've got the direct integration with Google Analytics. Another reason that I like it is there are more custom design options, and we'll get into that a little bit. And some alternatives that you've probably heard of are Tableau, Power BI. The kind of nuance with that one is that sort of only on the PC that you can edit reports. Domo and Click are other good options. Today we're looking at Looker Data Studio. Another kind of nuance is that it makes it easy to work with dates. And so you don't have to spend nearly as much time making various parameters to do comparisons and stuff like that. And we'll show some of that stuff. So next up, analytics.google.com is the website. This link in the slide, which I think is shared elsewhere, gets you access to the demo account. If you have never used Google Analytics, it might try to get you to sign up for a new account. You can put things in like test, and it doesn't matter if it's telling you that it's not loaded. Essentially, you want to kind of get out of that and see if you can, once you have gotten as far as setting up a web stream, maybe even come back and try to click this link and see if it just takes you to the demo account. From there, I'm going to actually pause out of the slides here and jump over to the we're going to show the sort of finished product before we get into it. So this is what we're going to be building. We've got an acquisition overview, which is a really common kind of analysis report that I've put together for a lot of clients. Here we have detail about what channels we're driving traffic. So direct traffic is you pretty much had a link to the website, or you directly typed in the URL, or you maybe had a bookmark. Organic search would be you came from like Google or Bing or DuckDuckGo. Paid search would be for ads, referrals, essentially any other site that drove traffic. And then unassigned is basically Google saying we're not we're not really sure how we should group this. So that'll happen for various reasons. Email is traffic from obviously email campaigns. Organic social will be stuff from like Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn that you're not spending money on. And sometimes you'll see paid social on some accounts because that's a popular ad, strategy. Cross network is going to be more Google stuff. Google's also showing off organic shopping. Then we have display ads. And so there's a variety of channels here. We're talking about sessions. And so the date range we have on the top is basically set to last month. And so for last month, the shop.merch.google site had 75,000 sessions. And we're showing here that that's up 24.6% over the previous year. We also have this percent delta in this table that's showing these channels and how they compare to the previous year. We then also have the sessions compared to all the other sessions. So we can see at a glance that organic search accounted for 27% of sessions last month. In these graphs, we're also showing the dark blue line is the period we're interested in, with the lighter blue being from the previous year. So we can kind of see at the end of March a year ago, there was some kind of dip in traffic, which is interesting. There might be a question about that. What happened last year? Here on the right-hand side, we're looking at purchase volume, or sorry, revenue by day. And again, compared to the previous year. To continue kind of through this table, we've got the percent difference for the percent of sessions. So, direct traffic, there's more direct traffic a year ago, basically by 19.6% less rather this year. And then we've got the purchase data, kind of the differences we're seeing with that year over year. ECVR, which is just something that is short for e-commerce conversion rate, makes it fit in the space a little easier. And then how that's changed, the total revenue, and then how that's changed, and then sort of what channels are driving the percent of revenue. So kind of a lot to look at here. It's a big snapshot. We can actually click on organic search, and then all of this data filters. So now we're looking at only the organic search traffic. You can see the numbers 41,000 here, match with the revenue up here. We've also got an AOV calculation. And if we reset that, we can also say, what about mobile traffic? And so we can see they got less mobile traffic last month than they did the previous year, but there was a pretty big increase in organic shopping. And then, so we can kind of filter those how we want to. We can also kind of get into only returning users or only new users if we want to look at that. So this is the acquisition overview. Also, it's set out of the gates to automatically pull last month. There are a bunch of different presets with this date picker where you can pull up, a variety of different time frames depending on how you want to analyze things, or you can pick your own dates. I'm gonna leave that alone for now. The next page is user acquisition. This is a newer report with GA4, and this is really quite similar to what we were just looking at. You're like, well, this is basically the same thing. What's the difference? Well, we're talking about users and new users, and we're also talking about the channel that drove them to your site the first time. So whereas the previous channel we were looking at was like for the current session, like as in I came to the site just now, and what channel drove me. This is maybe today is my 5th visit to the site, and the first channel that drove me was a paid search ad or something like that. So this allows us to see the various metrics as they line up for the first sort of touch, the first session. And so it's an interesting way to look at how new user activity might be different from the session traffic. Another thing that maybe is kind of curious here is that we have total users and we have new users. And the way that these things get calculated under the hood by Google are a little bit different. And so you can only be a new user one time. You can also only be a total user one time. So there's probably some kind of filtering going on in the background. This is coming straight from GA4. So that's a a head scratcher kind of nuance there. And depending on what time frames you're looking at, these numbers may or may not look funny in that respect. But nothing to be concerned about. And then the next page we have here is landing pages. So now the first page that drove traffic. And so again, we can click on like the homepage here. That slash represents the homepage because there's nothing else on the URL. Now we're filtered down to that activity. We've now layered in the device category on these trend lines instead of doing the year-over-year comparisons. So it becomes really easy to see that the majority of the traffic to the site is from desktop with a little bit of mobile, and not so much of anything else. And most of the revenue is coming from desktop, at least on the homepage. Here, since we're not doing the year-over-year comparisons, we're just kind of looking at sessions, percent of sessions, the purchases, conversion rates, and revenue with that distribution. So one other thing, for those of you that may or may not remember the Universal Analytics, there was an ability to kind of click on a channel in the channels report and then drill down to see more detail about it. So here we've clicked to paid search, and there's a little arrow that shows up. And we can click on that, and then now we can see the source and medium, which is Google CPC. If we click on this, we can then drill down one more time to get at the campaign level data. So there's a lot more kind of happening sort of under the hood, and there's an ability to interact with the report, which is really cool. Also, let's say, for example, we were looking at maybe a larger time frame. On these charts, we can drill up to see things by the week or even by the month. So we'll get into how we do all those things. So I'm going to jump back over to the slideshow now. So you'd want to go to lookerstudio.google.com, and this is just a screenshot of this. I'm trying to make it so that I can show off what you need to see without showing off too much other stuff. So click the blank report. Then you'll see a screen that looks like this, and you can click Google Analytics here. You can see there's a variety of other sources, BigQuery and Amazon Redshift. Postgres SQL is another one that's supported. So lots of options for connectors. Once you click the Google Analytics connector, you'll see a list of all the accounts you have access to on the left. You want to look for demo account and then the Google Merch Shop. After clicking that, you'll get this dialog that pops up, and then you can click Add to Report. So at that point, you'd be looking at a screen that looks like this one. And they put this table here by default, and you'll notice we have views and then a bunch of zeros. So this is kind of one of the first things. Universal Analytics before GA4 was all about the page views, and GA4 is all about the events. So one of the first things you could do if you're just trying to make sense of a new data set is swap that to, say, event count, and now you can actually see event counts for all these items. So we're going to delete that table. And oh, that's funny. It's just giving me that table. Okay, maybe we'll just leave that there for now. So the website we're tracking is on one of these tabs. I thought I had here. So shop.merch.google. And another thing, I mentioned that Looker Studio has ability to customize reports for the look and feel. So I just copied the link to this logo. And what we're going to do is we're going to create an image by URL and paste in the logo that we copied. And now we've got the logo, which is pretty nice. So we can kind of just put that up in the top left. And another thing we'll see when we're looking at this, there's this line here. So we'll kind of replicate a little line as well. And with that line, we can add a little shadow to it. And I think that was, see, we make that a little thicker. Make it a little bit lighter. So we've got something that's kind of similar to what we're seeing here. Another thing when you're first starting off with the report is you can go to theme and layout. You can go to customize. And it's worth doing this kind of on the first run to kind of set your default fonts. We'll use Railway here. And if you wanted to kind of get the colors right, you could kind of use, your inspector to find some of the colors. Here's a gray color that we could bring in there if we wanted to. I'm just going to go with the defaults for now since it's Google, so their colors will probably look like their colors. And within this, we can also, let's see, there's a chart header thing. I'm going to change that to always show. So that was that piece that had the drill down that we were seeing. And so there's a way to make that show up on an individual chart level. I just find that it's nice to have it there kind of by default. And another thing that we like to do is, and kind of following the Google styles here, we're looking for a border radius on this curve. And so I previously found it, and it was around, I think it was like 28 or something. So we're just going to set this to 25. Okay, so now if we look at this table and add a little border shadow, you can see that we get those sort of curves, right? So looking at this, we've got acquisition overview and we've got a date picker. So let's get those going. So we're just going to create a text box here. And did I must not have. Oh, I missed that one. So we're going to set that to Railway. All right. It's more of a Google looking font, and then make that bold and bigger. a little bit more gray, and then just kind of resize it. And we can add that border shadow. Oh, funny, the radius didn't stick there. Huh. I think also we might want to center this to make it look a little nicer. There it goes. It was selected previously. All right, so now we've got kind of a heading, and we'll add another control, which is a date range control. In the date range control, when you place this, it's got this auto date range. On this side, you can select last month right here. So there's a variety of presets, last 7 days, 14, so on and so forth. Last week starts Sunday or Monday, depending on how you do things. Last quarter, last year. The nice thing about this is it'll just stay on last month. So when it's May and we say last month, we're going to see all the data for April. And with this table, we can now build out some of the things we were looking at previously. So we wanted to see the channel group, and there's this session default channel group is the one that represents the session. So we've got that. And what else do we have in here? Sessions. Let's look at that. So we've got the sessions, and then we bring in sessions a second time. And within this little arrow here, we can do a comparison calculation and say percent of total. So then I'll just put in a name right above that, percent sessions. So now we've got the total sessions, the percent, and next up we have e-commerce purchases. And then we're going to do that same thing where we put it in a second time to get the percent. And then the next one here is ECVR. So this is an opportunity to look at how we can add calculated fields to a data set. We're going to click add a field, and we're going to say the sum, actually, this thing says AUT, so it automatically takes care of the aggregation for you. And so we don't actually have to do sum there. So within here, we got transactions per sessions, and that's how we get the e-commerce conversion rate. We'll save that. And it's for some reason. There we go. Once it saves, we can click back over here and we can search for it. And you see it's a number. We want it to be shown as a percent. And so you can kind of see within a data set, there's a few different options you have to change aggregations. If you see a green sort of button, indicates a dimension. And if we're seeing at the very bottom, blue, we've got metrics. And there's various ways to impact or declare sort of how you want these formatted and aggregated. We're going to click done for the sake of this, do ECVR. And then again, ECVR. Actually, did we do that one? No, we don't compare that one. Sorry. Let's look what's next here. Purchase revenue. sometimes. And you can also search on this data tab over here if you want. So like using that one as an example, if we do the purchase revenue, we could bring that, we can just drag it over if that's how you like to work. And then again, comparison percent of total, percent purchases. And so now we're starting to have a table that's pretty close to the one that we had previously. So I'm just going to kind of extend the length of this. There's a new feature that Looker Studio just launched that is probably slightly outside of the scope of this, but there is now an ability to make responsive dashboards that will actually kind of stack things like you're used to seeing mobile websites work, where you've got the desktop site, that's all a big thing, and then the mobile version will stack. And it's just as easy as selecting an option when you're first starting the report. But kind of scoped this out a little bit before that. So we've got a bunch of data here, and we still don't have our comparison, the percent deltas that we're looking for. So we need to add those in. And that's as easy as just turning on this comparison date range and then selecting another preset. So the advanced, we're going to skip over that for now, but it's pretty easy to select previous year. And then now we've got all sorts of stuff showing percent differences over the year. And this table's getting a little big. So we can kind of hover over this, resize columns and fit to data. See if that looks any better. I'm actually going to hit refresh on this whole thing really quick. Sometimes these lines will get a little off. Now you can see that there's lines for everything. So we can kind of come in here and resize this a bit. So we're able to see all the things. And these, you'll see these titles are all cut off, which makes it pretty hard to understand what you're looking at. So if we click over to style, we can, under table header, click wrap text, and now we're able to see a bit more there. So you can kind of play with, you know, how you want that to be spaced. Sometimes distribute evenly is the way to go. Sometimes fit to data works better. Today it didn't really like that, but so we'll just kind of clean this up a little bit. And yeah, I guess. Kind of making sure that there's an element of I want this to be readable, but I also want to be able to see the sort of raw data in the tables. And so I just kind of play with it until I think I'm kind of seeing it how I'd like to see it. So for the most part, we're seeing things here that look pretty good. So I'm going to just maybe shrink this one a little. Okay, so we're able to see most of that. And now we've got the start of this table. If we want to add those drill downs, we can just flip the switch and say session source medium, and then session campaign. And so now we can drill down in this table to see the source medium, and we can drill down again to see campaign level data. Now, some of these are cut off, so maybe you don't like that. You can come over here, and in the table body, you can also have the text set to wrap, so you can see the whole thing. I think, generally speaking, if we're presenting data in a table format, if you can't see it and it's hidden behind an interface like this, it's not very useful. Also, if you did have, like, if you wanted the columns to be super wide so that there was no text wrap, you can now do horizontal scrolling and it'll lock at a certain column. I'm going to skip over that for this, but just sharing that that's an option that allows you to then scroll kind of left to right to see all the data. So at this point, we've got kind of it's funny how some of these, so this is looking pretty similar. The color here is a little bit different though, so make that gray. And now we've got a fairly similar looking table to work with. So now we're gonna add some charts. There's a whole variety of charts in here. We're just gonna go with the time series. And in this scenario, comparison date range is previous year. And it just kind of grabbed sessions. So we're essentially already off to the races with this one. We want to add a border shadow. And then now we've got that sort of Google radius. And so we'll just kind of pull that up so it's not overlapping with the table. Maybe bring this down a little bit. And then at this point, we can just copy this and paste it again, drag that one over here. And just kind of trying to size these similarly sized. And then we'll just grab the purchase revenue. All right, so now we've got the table, the two charts, and we're going to add some scorecards. So the scorecards, we don't really love the bar on the top because it pushes everything down. So we're going to go to do not show on the style tab. It's all the way at the bottom. And then in the setup, it's already set to sessions. We can turn on a comparison date range and set this to previous year. And so you can see here we're getting the percent difference, which is what we show in our chart in the example we went over. But if you wanted to click absolute change, you could see the difference, right? So this is showing that we got 14,874 more sessions than the previous year. I tend to like it on the percent. And then we will, again, give it a border shadow. It gets that radius. And then we'll just kind of clean this, kind of resize it a little so it feels like it looks like it's a good size. At that point, copy and paste. And we've got the purchases. So here we'll go e-commerce purchases. And you can see that this is running off the edge. And so, that's where any of these metrics you can rename, which is pretty nice to make them fit here. If you're then working on a dash later on, you can't remember what that was, it'll tell you the source field right there if you click on that edit. So we've got purchases, copy and paste, and we'll do a few of these. Okay, so purchases, that ECVR. And then, just to kind of make that look like the rest of the report, we'll update that. Purchase revenue. This one. So there's a few options here. Once the numbers get larger, you can click compact numbers. So it'll kind of abbreviate them, or you can set your decimal precision to like 0, which I think for a revenue number is okay. Little note on Google Analytics, it is something that runs in the browser using JavaScript with all the known things that JavaScript can bring to the table. So it's one of those things where probably slightly different than any other data platform. You've got it's definitely directionally accurate. It might not be accurate down to the cent or down to the exact transaction. If somebody had ad block, or there's a variety of reasons why some data would not come through in various situations. So that's kind of something to keep in mind when you're analyzing the GA4 data. So purchase revenue, and then the last one here, we're going to do AOV. So this one is another kind of good opportunity for a calculated field. We can do the purchase revenue divided by the transactions. So the share thing is my way. And just call that AOV. And then once that saves, we can come over here, search for that, and say we want that to be a currency. So now we can go AOV and make that look like the rest of them. So at this point, we've got a table, 2 charts, some scorecards, and now we just want to add those filters. I'm going to make this, it's looking a little faded to me. That looks a little better. Okay. So the filters in this control section, there's a variety of different control options. The drop-down list is what we're using in this report. So we're going to create that. And what do we have here? Device category. So here, under the control field, we select device category. The metric here, if you click under here, it shows a metric, right? So currently set to AOV. We probably want it to set to like sessions, or sometimes you might want to set to revenue, depending on how you like to sort things. And then it's set by default to sort sessions by descending. So we can quickly at a glance, just by opening this filter, we can see that desktop has the most sessions. And then we'll just copy this and paste another one. And then we can go select new returning. All right, so that, there's one more thing we need to do. So here we talked about the date being something we could drill down to have like the week or the year and the month. And so if you turn on the drill down on a date field, it'll automatically give you 3 dates. So the date's the default, and it says that that's the default drill down level right there. If you wanted it to default to year month, you could certainly select that in that place. Same thing of the table where we have it doing the channel group. We could change that if we want it to be something else. And then here with the year month, we're good on that. And within this one, we want to show week. So we can click that edit button and then go to ISO year week. And then we can just call it like week or something up here. So then I like to kind of order them date, week, and then year, month. And so now if we're looking at this, we can drill up and we'll get 1 dot for the month since we're looking at a single month. And we can just do the same thing here. And now we're able to drill up and down to kind of show those various different slicing of the dates. And here by default, it's actually doing this cross. Is it doing it? It's funny that that's toggled off. So maybe not by default. So we can turn on cross filtering. And this is the thing that makes the interactions with the rest of the reports work. So if we look at the top, all these numbers have refreshed and we've seen these 2 graphs change. And you can click reset here. The button's kind of being funky there. Another thing you could do if you filter down, it actually shows you here. So we could turn that filter off there. And if we filter down again, there's also a reset button up here. Also, let's say you're looking at this and you click down to paid search and maybe you've got a drill down and you copy the link. You can see that the link, if we had been viewing this, let's say we were in view mode, this link isn't really changing depending on what I'm clicking. So if you wanted people to be able to share those filter settings, you can go into the file menu and it's report settings, which will show up over here, and then you can click this enable viewer filters and report link. And so then if we view this and add some filters, you'll see that there's some parameters that get added up there that allow you to share the exact view that you were seeing. And so moving along, what we can do here now to make the next page is add a page. It's going to copy that page by default. This first one was called acquisition overview, so we can rename that. And then we'll get rid of, well, actually, we're going to go duplicate the one we just made. Then we can delete the untitled one. And the next one's going to be first user channels. And here, since we already have this data, we can, I'm going to turn off the drill down. And we can just go first user. It's funny how this, forgetting what it's called. First user default channel group. Easy enough to remember. Okay, so now we've got all of this data just got regrouped, but some of that data was slightly different, right? So we're doing total users, new users, and then e-commerce purchases, ECVR, purchase revenue, and revenue. So we can just come to sessions here and swap this out with users, total users, and then total users again. And then we have to rebuild that percent of total. And then we'll add new users. And we can do that same comparison calculation, percent of total, percent new users. One thing to note, Google Analytics used to have more opinions about data. And so there was more of a hit level scope, a session level scope, and a user level scope. In the new version of GA4, everything's sort of event based. So that's the hit level. And then there's stuff that's also user based. The session level stuff was kind of added in after the fact. And one of the things when it comes to new users that makes a little bit more sense is to compare percent new sessions. So when the session is coming from a new user, that's a little bit more of an intuitive, like what you would think about when you're thinking about a new user versus if you have a count of new users that are basically account distinct, the longer the time frame, like you only count them one time, whereas they could have come back for 5 different sessions. So as time goes by, it can look more and more like it's 98% new users. And so that's a little bit of a confusing thing when it comes to the data. So percent new sessions is a little bit more intuitive to think about. Just food for thought there. So at this point, we've got total users, percent of users, new users, percent new, and then the rest of that is basically the same. Purchase revenue, percent revenue, purchases. Yep. Percent I think this was supposed to be percent purchase. Probably just say percent revenue, because that's percent of that. So again, this data we added stuff. So I like to try this. If that looks good. We can also try fitting to data, see if we get better results here. Usually it will bring that text field over. I don't know, it's not wanting to do that this morning. So I'm just taking a little time to resize these. Let's say there was a field in here where you're like, you know what? I got total users. I can see how that's changed. And I got the percent of users. Maybe for whatever reason, I don't want the percent of users in terms of how that changed since last year. So in the style tab of this chart, there's some settings for each metric group. So we've got dimension, and then we've got one comparison, two comparison, and perhaps that comparison we didn't want on that users for whatever reason. So if that was the case, there's this. So this is metric number 1, and then metric number 2. We can uncheck show compare, and then we lose the year-over-year comparison for the percent users. So that's, say you were like, oh, this is great, but I only want to see the year-over-year stuff for like one of these metrics. You're able to select that, and then also choose whether or not it's the absolute, as we kind of looked at earlier. So actually, I'm just going to go back and distribute this evenly for now, and just going to let that look silly for the sake of moving through this. So we're to duplicate this page and call it like landing pages. And I suppose on the first one, it was called acquisition overview. We changed the name of the page, but we forgot to say update those. And then on the third one, landing pages. And here we had something slightly different. Instead of this, we gave ourselves a breakdown dimension of device category. And what you can see here is what I would call confusing. There's a lot of different colored lines. I think we might also still have the comparison date ranges in there. If you turn that off, there's less lines. It's a little easier, but that's where choosing a different chart that stacks it makes it a little bit, in my opinion, a little easier to understand what's going on there. So similarly, we can add device category here, the area, and then turn off so I tend to, oops, what did I do there? I accidentally turned off that drill down. Let's bring that back. So the comparison piece, which I must have turned that off already, is one of the things where if you're doing a comparison, it kind of makes sense to have the one metric compared to the whatever period, versus if you're trying to break something down, adding a comparison in there alongside that, at least in this format, is just a little busy and hard to interpret. So something to think about when building charts. So then here, if we look back at this one, the session data is actually more similar to the table we had on the acquisition report. So we're just going to delete that one, come back over here, do a little copy, and then paste. And then we can do landing page. You'll notice you may have noticed there were 2 fields for landing page. So the landing page without the query string just means you get everything. And then if there's a question mark in the URL on your website, you won't see that. So here, I don't see any question marks. Here we have a question mark, item list name equals category. So if somebody were landing on that page, you wanted to know about that, you might want to choose the version that has a query string. So we can show you what that looks like. And actually, let's just say we add it as a drill down. So let's see if this will work the way I want it to. It's funny how it's just rebellious against maybe they changed something with that recently. It used to do a pretty good job at expanding those text fields. But so here we've got landing page. If we wanted to then drill down, we could see once it loads, here's one with a query in it. It tends to look a little bit more busy, and you've got usually multiple rows for a given page type. So that's where I like unless there's something about your site that's very crucial in terms of the query strings that are being displayed, I would recommend just using the landing page. Now we have a not set field here, and so that might be confusing. So I'm sure if you've ever left a tab open and come back to it, you've probably had a scenario where maybe this was open and you were mulling it over. Should I buy it? And maybe you added to cart. And I did that. Let's assume that I just come back to this page and it had been over an hour. The reason I say over an hour is that Google Analytics has a default timeout of like 30 minutes. So anytime you view a page or send an event to Google Analytics, a 30-minute timer starts. When that 30-minute timer ends, it'll basically say the session's over. If you then send a new data point or a new event, it's a new session at that point. And so that's something you can control in the property level if you want that to be longer. But if you send an add to cart event before a page view, that's a scenario where you have a landing page that's not set. And that can kind of be confusing to some people. So it's usually a good idea to just exclude not set landing pages unless there's a reason you want to be analyzing that. And so we can say landing page is null. No, actually, I'm kidding about that. Equals, it'll actually show as not set here. So this is a nice like autocomplete thing that is pretty recent with Looker Data Studio. So now we add that exclusion, and that kind of excludes that from this row. So another thing you can do with tables is you can show a summary row. And if you were to do something like that with this filtered, you notice the summary of sessions here is 68,662. It's a different number there. Someone might ask you why. So something to keep in mind. And maybe you say, well, we're not going to do the summary row today. So let's see, what else do we have here? Yeah, so we just only have the device category. I think we've now completed the build. I guess my fonts were slightly a little bit off there, but it's basically the same data, slightly different presentation. And I suppose we could ask questions.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Josh. That was very cool. I have to say, I only kind of occasionally do this kind of analytics, so it was good to see someone does this regularly, like putting together a dashboard. We've got 5 minutes of questions for anyone in the audience. Please do ask your questions now. We've got time for a couple. Before we go to that, I've just got a couple of questions for you. So first, I don't have a strong sense of what are the easiest business questions to answer using this kind of analytics, and what are the trickier things. Like if you want to get started with this, like what's a good first problem to try and solve?
Yeah, so a lot of times, people are like, "Oh, I've got a new site going live, and we want the analytics on it so we can track the activity." And like, what does that mean? But some typical questions are, what channels are driving traffic to my site, which I think the acquisition overview kind of addresses that. You sort by revenue on that table, and now you can say what channel is driving the most revenue in order, and what's the average order value when someone's placing an order on the site. Um, the conversion rate is a big one. Like you'll hear kind of people saying in the sort of if you've got a 1% conversion rate, it means like 99% of sessions are not converting, and so that's is that good? Is that bad? Sometimes it depends on your industry. Sometimes it depends on the average price of the item. If it's a $5,000 item that you sell on average, like obviously not everyone's going to buy that the first time they come to the website versus if it's like a $20 item. So understand that conversion rate, understanding that as it breaks down by channel. So that ability to click on the channel and then see what the conversion rate is for that channel. Um, and then even at the device level, right? There's a different sort of experience. Um, so those are kind of some of the common, what channels are driving new users. A lot of companies are like, we need new customers in order to grow. We can get our returning customers to keep buying from us, but we need more customers, filling up the funnel to keep the business going strong for years to come. When it comes to the website, the homepage is the most common page people tend to go to if they've heard of your brand. But if you're doing SEO and you've got strategy behind that, you might have various different pages that are optimized for certain keywords that people are searching for. You want to see uh, if those keywords are actually doing a good job at driving traffic. So a different kind of thinking about the drill downs that we were using, you could have potentially put page title as a drill down. So you could click on homepage and then you could see page title. If you made any edits to your page titles over the last few months, you could then see any kind of changes in volume come in to those pages by doing something like that. Um, so yeah, another question. I I know we talk about the journey here. There's other ways to kind of create like events, in sequence, and then see where the drop off is. I knew I had a lot to explain, so I was like, uh, but so that might be another thing. Like perhaps a common thing for e-commerce, right, would be like they landed on the site, they viewed a category page, oftentimes referred to as a product list page, then made it to a product description page. That's sort of what we would call the shopping activity. And then if they add to cart, that's sort of a successful shopping. But then once something's in the cart, we want to analyze the checkout, right? So like, did they start the checkout? Usually there's like a handful of steps, 1 to 3 steps in terms of like entering your information, your billing information, and completing the payment. So those are things where there are some built-in, actually within GA4, there's some built-in funnel tools, but also Looker Studio has some of those. So those, I think, there are interesting reports to look at, and I think that they may or may not always make sense to look at as far as like what can we control today, right? So like if you have um, like you're redesigning the website, you want to look at those things because you want to understand how people are moving around. But if it's a scenario where like, oh, they're dropping off at checkout and like we don't offer like Apple Pay or something and we think that's what it is. And, it's sort of maybe we're kind of looking at that to understand like, okay, here's a drop off. And if we added Apple Pay, we think it would be better than that. So we've got a baseline ahead of time. But typically a lot of what you're doing is you know, kind of looking at where they came from. I know a lot of people sometimes get interested in like, well, they came here, then they went to this page, then they went to that page. And Looker Studio can do like Sankey charts if you want to like kind of do more of a flow. But again, that gets more in a path of like you're sort of um, there's an exponential number of ways that people can navigate things. So there's not usually going to be one path. You might go to a category, look at an item, open it in a new tab, like search for, some people might search for reviews. Can I get it on Amazon for cheaper? There's all sorts of different things that people are doing. So when you're trying to aggregate that, that's why like these kind of core reports that we shared.
That's fascinating. It sounds like you can basically do kind of arbitrarily complex analytics on this, but also interesting how it seems like there's a difference between the way growth engineers might want to use these analytics compared to product managers. So useful for a lot of different people. I'm just a bit curious. Cautious of time because we are coming up to the hour.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a couple of quick audience questions. Before that, I'm going to say if you enjoyed this session, there is another quite similar code along happening next Tuesday. We've got a product manager or product analytics expert from Stripe coming to do a code along. So similar to this, but in Python. So yeah, please do come back for that. All right, so let's just take. There's a couple of related questions here. So this one's from Oracle of Delphi Redux Club. Very nice username. Can you set up a report on users' click paths using Looker Studio? And then a related one here from Dietrich Kasselman. Can you walk us through the customer journey using the report? So basically, like, how do you go from like, okay, we've got all this data, we've built a dashboard. Can we report on it and turn it in, like, answer some business questions?
Yeah. So if we were looking at the user level data, this is kind of an interesting thing from GA4. There's an ability to send user IDs into GA4, depending on how you've got it set up. And if you do send user IDs, Google is very sneaky about how they surface that and how you're allowed to access it. So a lot of times what you want to do, and we're getting into more of a custom setup, is set a dimension that has the user ID in it that you've created. So Google, you'd say, here's the user ID that's built in. But then if you actually want to use that and have access to that, you want to set it a second time as a custom dimension so that you can access it and tell Google about it. Within that, everything is event-based and time-stamped. So if we get those user IDs as a dimension into a table and you sort by event name, for example, with the date time added to the table, you would then be able to potentially add a drop down with the user ID field, select any given user ID, and then see a table with like, in reverse chronological order, what that person was, each event. And certainly I think if you really want to analyze kind of what are they doing or like see more of the experience, I think something like the Microsoft tool, why am I blanking on the name of that right now? Clarity, Microsoft Clarity is a good way to see a recording, like a screen recording of a session. Again, with the Sankey charts, you can kind of, if you have an idea like, oh, they went to this page, and this page, you want to see that, you can pull together a Sankey chart and it'll kind of group the users in terms of how they're going down that path.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off 'cause, we're kind of we're well past time. So yeah, it seems like there was a sort of a subtlety to that question that I'd missed. So a lot of the data exists at like either event level or session level, but actually what you really care about is use level stuff. And you've got to do some kind of aggregation there in order to get sensible business results. Okay, and yeah. I like your idea of making use of Sankey charts for flows. One of the under values types of data visualization there.
Yep.
All right, wonderful. So yeah, we're well past time, so we're gonna have to wrap up. But yeah, thank you so much, Josh. I felt like I learned a lot there, and very cool to see how you can just like pull in some website data, answer some business questions, create some value pretty quickly. Wonderful. Yeah, so thanks again. Thank you to everyone in the audience who asked a question. Thank you to everyone who showed up today. I will see you all again soon. All right, goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.